Welcome back to the Anika Apple podcast. Thank you for joining me today as we continue our conversation around the importance of understanding our divine identity and how it is a foundation for us to walk in our purpose. There is nothing more critical in the time that we are in than truly knowing who we were created to be, and that is identity. And then certainly our purpose is how we live into delivering the assignment that we were created to do here on earth. And what I know to be true is that healing helps us to restore our identity. And then identity becomes the foundation for our purpose. And all of this is an opportunity for us to grow deeper and more consistent in delivering the things that we are gifted to do in this world. And if you didn't already know, if no one's told you today, your purpose, the assignment that you came here to fulfill, is needed more now than ever. And so it is my honor to be here as God's prophet, God's heart on earth, and to call you back into your truth, to encourage you to show up in a way that is in alignment with who you were created to be, and to experience the freedom and alignment that God offers to you when you walk in the fullness of your authority and you are here delivering what you came to do. So in this month, we are spending time on identity so that we can ground ourselves in our truth. This work on the Anika Apple podcast couples beautifully with my book, Healing is Required. And if you've not grabbed your copy, you can do so at healingisrequired.com or on Amazon or your favorite bookstore. Go to your favorite Black-owned bookstore and ask for Healing is Required by Anika Apple. But this work is a blueprint together to help us to return to the truth of who we are. This healing work that we are exploring throughout the book, Healing is Required, is about helping us demystify what healing really is, how God created us with the ability to know what we need to heal, how we are connected to one another, which certainly is part of the order of the day when we look at the chaos happening all across the globe. And then how to formulate the team that you need to do your healing work. So if you've not grabbed your copy of the book, I encourage you to go out and make sure you do it. But let's get into the episode today. If you've been in a moment where you are sensing that something is shifting and you're not sure what it is, you don't know exactly how to put your finger on it, I just want you to know that you are not alone. We are in a season of returning home to ourselves, returning back to our truth. And even though we could probably all have sat together a year or two ago and said, I can't wait to get back to a place that feels real, feels like real freedom, feels like real authenticity, that has me deeply rooted in the truth of who I am in ways that I couldn't even imagine before. And if we said that a couple years ago, we probably wouldn't have expected it to look and feel like this. There's something about this idea of coming home to yourself that feels like that in and of itself should be easeful. The ease is actually on the other side of standing in the truth of who you are. It is the disconnect that you have to navigate through of the version of yourself that you've become and the version of yourself that you're meant to be that is a little bit of the messy middle. Not really a little bit. It's complex. And one of the things I love that I talk about in Healing is Required is the importance of having the right team to support you as you go through that healing journey, because you will need support. Healing is not something that we are supposed to do in isolation. You'll want to have some people to have conversations with it about. You'll want to talk to your family and understand some of the patterns of behavior, because that will help you to see yourself more clearly and coherently. You want to navigate through different modalities to help you on your path to heal. And so I encourage you to do that. And certainly the book has lots of different recommendations for you. And I know you will find that valuable. But let's get into the episode today. So today I want to share with you a bit about who I hid to survive. And I know that my story will not be foreign to you, that you'll find a lot of yourself in the things that I share. But we're sitting on this concept of borrowed identity versus authentic identity. And we seeded it a little bit in last week's episode, but let's talk about this for a minute. This is about us identifying with things outside of ourselves and then morphing ourselves to become that, in alignment with that. That's what borrowed identity is all about. And it's important for us to remember that when we recognize that there are parts of our identity that we may have borrowed for the moment, that it served a purpose. So this is not about us, being down on ourselves or disappointed in the way we chose to survive. It was survival. The moment that we're in offers us the recognition that we can wake up and choose that we don't have to be in survival mode anymore. And let me tell you something. That is incredibly powerful, especially in a moment like now, where it feels like so much of what you've known to be true is being threatened. Because what your identity offers you is something that no one can take away. Here's why. Your authentic identity was given to you by your Creator. So man didn't give it to you. They can't take it away. They can't tell you something that your Creator says you are. And being able to be grounded in that and the promises of God is so incredible in a time like this. And for those of you that have a different relationship with what you consider to be the divine source, God, whatever it is that you call it, I encourage you to sit with that energy as you listen to these episodes. But understand that your identity is yours. However you believe creation happened, it is within you. It is not something you get from outside of yourself. And it's interesting because if we limit ourselves to what the external sources say about who we are, we will be in deep trouble. Here we are in 2026, right? And there's an app that I use quite often to build presentations and things like that. And the other day I searched for Black female executives. And I could not believe the limited amount of pictures available on this massive platform. Surely, with the amount of Black women who own businesses, much less working in corporate spaces, we should have more representation in pictures than that. But the handful that were truly what would have been appropriate for the piece that I was working on was staggering. It tells a story about what we think is utilized in the world. It tells a story about what we think the roles are that people play. I could find lots of other representation for us, but not that which represents the level that we are moving out of corporate experiences and running our own businesses. Not to mention the fact that we have always been at the forefront of pioneering and innovating as entrepreneurs. So it's a very interesting dynamic. And for those of you who are like, well, Anika, that the way a CEO dresses and looks today is different, or the way executives do. I know. I love my blazer and jeans. I love my leggings and sweaters and all of the other things in between. But there has to be representation that looks like what we align on, that would be in a professional setting. My point to you is this. If we allow someone else to shape the way we identify ourselves, we are always going to be beholden to them. It's the same when it comes to your divine identity. If you allow it to be shaped by what is available to you, you will have a difficult time seeing yourself. Because here's the thing. You are unique in who God created you to be. And so in order to see a full representation of yourself, you've got to sit with God. You got to talk to your higher self. You've got to connect in with what you believe is divine. You have to be connected in a way that is different than looking to the world to help you identify yourself. For me, that looked like borrowing the identity from all of these different people through different parts of my journey, not to emulate them, but to see what is similar about me that helps me on a pathway to what it is that they have achieved or where they are or what have you. And the people-pleasing part of me became a forefront part of that journey. I would say to you that we do the work to meld ourselves into the identities that we see in the world, and they are not us. It's almost like it's difficult to imagine that God could have uniquely created each of us with our own identities, that we might have some shared things, but that we are unique in terms of what it is that we are here to do and who we are to be as we are doing it. There are many people that God has said to them, call yourself my prophet. I know that to be true. I know some of them, right? I also know that I am God's prophet. So there are many of us that can be God's prophet, and we all have different identities. The fullness of our identity is unique to who we are and to what the purpose is. And you are no different from that. So see, instead of us finding these similar things in the world and beginning to meld, the work to do is to heal ourselves enough that we will accept the truth about who God says we were created to be. That's the healing work that helps to create the foundation that restores you to your identity, that helps you recalibrate yourself to what is actually true. And that allows us to then begin to dismantle the narratives that we've created about who we are. It's really hard to see when you are in a moment of coming from scarcity because you don't see a lot of representation to identify yourself with something, not knowing that you are sacrificing part of who you are. I never imagined that the way that I modeled myself to move into senior and executive leadership in the companies that I worked for, that somehow was quieting or stifling my gifting. It wasn't until I worked in an environment that really allowed me to bring the fullness of who I was in the room. And I heard people who were honest enough, because we did the team building work, to say, when you show up like this, that's what I need. They created a space for me where I knew it was safer for me to allow more of myself in. And then through the work that I did with God, I decided that I will only go into the spaces where I am allowed to bring that version of myself. Because when I show up and I bring the executive experience and my prophetic insight into a space, onto a board, into a leadership discussion, things change. Because I see what other people don't. Because I have experience that other people may not. Because I can put these things together in a way that delivers truth and candor with love and empathy and vulnerability. Those amidst all of the other things that God has created me to uniquely be able to deliver. And you are no different. You have the very same beautiful mixture of things that are uniquely you that you have to offer in spaces. How much of it have you been hiding in order to survive? Let us decide that this year we're just not surviving anymore. That this is about living, and it's about living free. Because when we make a decision that we want to experience what it's like to live in freedom, then we will not tolerate a lot of what we are seeing and experiencing today. So let's be honest, the matrix world is open to radical authenticity for some, but certainly not for all. It's not even categorized in the same way when we talk about behavior from one person to another. The gender battle that we have been experiencing for decades continues to rage on. And even though we've seen some significant advancements, they still pale in comparison to the differentiation that we experience. The biases are still there. And we are in a moment where the biases are getting worse and worse, because the levels with which we create differentiation between people have dropped to an unseemingly amount of disconnect. We're getting further and further from seeing each other in this love thy neighbor way, further and further from being able to honor the individuality of people, especially when there's something that someone determines is threatening. So to continue to allow ourselves to identify with who we know we are not is a problem. I recognize that my lineage is their kings and queens, that they are people who God honored. I recognize that when I read the Word of God, when God is talking about their promises, they are talking to and about me. My identity helps me ground myself in that, so that regardless as to what people say, I understand who I am. No one can take that from me. And not only does your identity support you in having that depth of understanding, it also reminds you of the truth of your connection to God. You know, when you come here, I'm going to give you the truth. We've been conditioned to believe that the relationship that we have with God has to come through some other means other than just us and God, than having a direct conversation. When God says there's no good thing will I withhold from you, that includes you knowing who you are. And that definition doesn't come from other people. We've built so many systems in the world that encourage conformity as opposed to you standing authentically in who you are. And God is calling us back to it consistently, creating a time frame and people like myself who are called to call you home to yourself, to remind you of who you are and what you have the ability to do. It is not by accident that in Healing is Required, we talk about the way you own your path to healing, that it is your divine work to do, to reconnect with your body and understand the ability that you have within your vessel to heal itself. And not only that, that you have agency to identify and bring people on board to be your team in supporting you to do the healing work. Who I hid to survive was the being that had all of that wisdom and information. On next week's episode, I'll share with you a little bit about my healing journey and some of the inner child work I did and how that helped me to remember the things that were placed on the inside of me that are the supports that I need to deliver my assignment. How I used to say, like, God, I'm not called to be a healer. Like, I'm not trained to be a physician, or I'm not a functional practitioner in any of these specific modalities. Why would you call me to be the person who you've tapped on the shoulder and said, go heal the world? Because God had a plan. Very different than what I could have imagined and understood in my own mind. And so I suppressed that, the knowledge and wisdom that I had about healing, until a few years ago, where I noticed that people would ask me questions and I would be like, have you thought about this? You should look into this. Ask your doctor about that. That wisdom was just flowing to me divinely because it is a part of my being. That's what kind of intentionality God has for who we are. Now, in no way am I saying I'm replacing doctors. I'm not doing that. But what I will do is call you back to the truth that you have the ability to heal, and create platforms and safe spaces for you to understand how to connect with and find the practitioners and the modalities and the things that will support you to do it for yourself, or to create a team of your choosing to help you. That's my work to do. Call you home to yourself and remind you that everything that you need is already within you, because that's what God wants you to know. So what I hid to survive are so many brilliant gifts and talents and ideas, and so much instantaneous wisdom that God was flowing through me at any given time. I did not know what to do with that, how to share it, how to couch it. I learned over time how to say things in a corporate environment that helps people understand. And eventually, I just said what it was. When you stand in your identity, you can be in a place where you just say what it is. Because what you know unequivocally is you are backed by one who is infallible. And it doesn't matter if you believe what I say or not, because your belief doesn't make it not true. So I want you to remember this. Survival identities are efficient. but they are not eternal. They're not the full truth of who we are, the fullest expression of what God created. And when we stand in that, we change the world. You can't help but play your perfect role in all of the things that God designed for us to do before the foundation of the world. And that's brilliant. To be able to walk in that and to live a full life knowing that you're contributing in the way that actually is your soul's desire, that actually makes you feel good inside, that actually helps you live in a way that is the fullest expression of yourself. That's what tapping into the truth of your identity will do. On last week's episode, I mentioned that when you are standing in your truth, when you are living in this aligned life, that it changes the impact on your nervous system. One of the things that I would share with you is that I have this relationship with rest. And perhaps you've heard of it, right? It's like you'll sleep when you're dead, or you rest is for the weak. All of these different things that we tell ourselves. And granted, there are plenty of people who are millionaires and billionaires and things like that who operate with that kind of mindset. But what a lot of them don't tell you is they're running full throttle when you see them running full throttle, but they have armies of people behind them doing the stuff that needs to get done. What a lot of them don't tell you is that built into the discipline are the ways that they play and they take care of themselves. Think about what your life might look like if you have an on-call physician, a chef, all of your support staff for your business, for your household, all of those. Think about the difference, right? And what God showed me in this healing journey was that my relationship to rest had to change in order for me to be in my identity. And I rejected that. I don't have time for rest, God. It's literally what I said to God. I just blew up my whole life, changed everything, got divorced, moved, all of these different things. And now I'm trying to create a life that is as similar as possible for my kids so that they, don't feel the depth of intense change that is here, which was a fallacy in and of itself, right? And God offered me rest. And I was like, nope, got to go back to work. I got to go. I need to, because I didn't know how to choose the identity that God was calling me to. I want to tell you a little bit about how that led to something that I've included in the book. So there is a story in the book, or an inset in the book, that is called Show Me Me. And it's just about in the center of the book, so it should be relatively easy for you to find. And so here's the excerpt. In retrospect, I wonder how many hours of sleep I gave up worrying about others in my decisions, and how it would impact everyone I knew. I felt guilty when I could not do more, even if what I had already given was exhaustive of what it should have been reasonably provided. I poured out energy until I was depleted. I showed up everywhere, even though I was too tired to go. I answered the late night calls that made me tired at work the next day. And all of these patterns were regularly in place in my teens and 20s. So in truth, I did not want God to reveal myself to me. I was reasonably sure that God would make me change, which meant that I would be on a journey to disappoint others. That was simply not what I had designed for who I was around. And then moving ahead, I had this conversation with my mentor, soul sister, one of my closest friends, dearest people to me, Kylie Carr, who also did the foreword for the book Healing is Required. And I can remember this moment like it was yesterday. This is several years ago now. I know exactly where I was standing when we had this conversation, a few feet from where I sit in this moment. And we had just been talking about some things that God had shown her about me and some things for her. And she said to me, she paused and said, I just want you to know that if you're not able to fully access your heart, you won't be able to fulfill your assignment here. And whew, as somebody who I know that was called to speak truth to me always, that God would always allow her to see me, to share feedback. She could confirm something that I had been in prayer with, or that God had said to me, like, I know that she's one of the people that God trusts to help me see myself. So I knew in this moment what she said was accurate. And at the same time, I was like, what you talking about, Willis? Like, no. And I also was very clear that it was not her assignment to help me understand what that meant, that work was mine. And so while I wanted to be like, but no, like I'm in full connection. Do you not see how I love people? How I sacrifice my time, how I show up at all the things. I try to be all the things that people need in my life because I was a people pleaser, remember? But that wasn't her work. And so I thanked her graciously for that and immediately came right into this room, which many of you know is my prayer room space. And I sat with God. Here's the continued excerpt. So she shared with me what she shared. And then I said, what was even better is that she had insight and examples if I needed them. She could share that there were times when she observed me holding back. The words spoke deeply to something that resonated. I knew it was true, but I didn't know how to fix it. Can you imagine that your identity is about carrying the love of God into the earth to help others see it, to reflect it back to them so that they can see themselves, to help them understand it so that they can then show up and demonstrate that kind of love to others? That's my assignment. So how could it possibly be that I was not fully connected to my heart? I'm like, if that's the whole reason why I'm here, this is a problem, right? And so I go to God in prayer and I continue with the excerpt. I went to God in prayer and started by surrendering my self-perspective to God's perspective. I've asked you to show me, and you have. Now help me see it in real time, to understand how it makes others feel, and show me how you desire it to be in me. Because that was the key. What do you actually want it to look like? How is that different from what I'm doing today? My openness to feedback and regular surrender opened the floodgates for feedback, examples, and opportunities to test and learn. Understanding how to connect with my heart has become a lifelong journey. It's my mission to master this skill as I evolve to guide others along the way. And I would close this by saying that part of my regular practice is to say to God, show me me. God, show me me. How do you desire me to be? What is it that you need for me to do or say or be in this situation? How do I operate in a way that is in alignment with your light? Not my desires, but who you've created me to be. Because I recognize that the identity, the survival identity, the way that I created identity for myself in this world, which again served its purpose, it's no longer needed. And I'm comfortable being vulnerable enough to say that I actually don't know how to be who you've called me to be yet. So help me see it. There are few more pivotal moments than sitting before God saying, I know what you've told me about who I am, and I don't know how to be her. And I will tell you honestly that the last time I said that to God was probably about 3 weeks ago. Sitting with God in prayer, journaling, and asking God, but I still don't know if I know. Because now what you're showing me is another level. What does that look like, God? I believe it will be a lifetime evolution for us to continue to understand the levels with which God desires us to show up in our identity. But we've got to start somewhere. And as I share in the excerpt, I had hoped when I started on the journey to get to an endpoint, right? Because that's what it's like in the rest of the way the world works, right? You learn something and then you get to a point where it's like, check, I've got it. And we forget that, once we've learned how to do computers and all of this stuff, that then something like AI comes along and, before you know it, the language has far surpassed what you have the ability to understand. We're always constantly in a state of evolving and growing if our intention is to continue to live. And so it stands to reason that God is going to reveal more to us about our identity as we go. So who I hid to survive was so many of the pieces that were required to be reclaimed in order to be in this level of my God-given identity. And then certainly there are more to come as God continues to reveal identity and purpose in alignment with who they've created me to be. The best part of all this is that God equipped me for all of it in the same way that God has been equipping you. This is about us returning to our wholeness, to the fullness of who we are. And the truth of the matter is, in the same way that she delivered those words with such love and tact, care, all of those things, you won't be able to fulfill your assignment if you can't access your full heart. Each of you you won't be able to fulfill your assignment unless you. And who holds the answer to that? You do. And if you know what that is today, move everything out of the way. Stop hiding the pieces of yourself in the survival mechanism so that you can explore, you can test. It's like taking the Band-Aid off and letting that thing get some air. So is it still tender? Like, you need to have that so that you can evolve in your identity. And if you're not sure what it looks like, take a page literally out of my book and ask God to show you. So your work this week is to explore, who is the you that you've hid? And I want to invite you to do that in a way that opens yourself up with grace and empathy. Because what you know today is very different than what you knew then. And what you may be choosing today is different than what you felt like were choices back then. You cannot compare what you would do to survive to what you can do in a time where you recognize that you have choices that lead you to thriving. They're not the same circumstances. So honor that in yourself as you choose who and how you want to live this life from here on out. And for me, I'll tell you that I continue to explore the parts of me that I've hid. I continue to allow myself to unfold. I always compare it to watching a flower unfold. You would not force a flower bulb to open. But if you allow it to have time, when it's ready, it will expose all that is within. And we are very similar. We can invite ourselves to open up so that we can see all of the pieces of ourselves that we've hid. And allow ourselves to then choose who it is that we desire to be. I know personally I hid a lot of my gifting. And there are things that I will share in the episodes to come to allow you to get to know more about what God has created on the inside of me. And I will just share with you today that I knew I heard from God as a child, and I told no one. And I knew that God spoke to me in ways that were really complex to understand. As I've grown older, I recognize that even the language that I used to speak when I was a child was tongues. And in my early 30s, late 20s, early 30s, I went to church with my godmother who has recently passed away. God bless her soul. And she invited me to go to church with her. And I remember in the morning that I was on my way to go visit with her, she called me and said, "By the way, I didn't tell you, but this church speaks in tongues quite a bit." And she said, "And so it can be off-putting for people, and I hope that's okay for you." And I was like, "Oh, yeah, it's fine." And at this point, I didn't have any reason to feel uncomfortable, but I also was like, but that's not for me. And I remember during worship, it was that early in the service that we were all standing and singing, and people started to speak in tongues, and I could not fathom what was happening because I could understand these different prayer languages without any kind of translation. I was like translating them in my mind, but there wasn't a process that I could equate to like when I listen to someone speak in a language that I understand, like Spanish, right? Like I know it's a word and I'm translating it into English. This was happening instantaneously. I could feel the emotion, I could understand what they were saying in the spirit, and I was like, what is happening right now? And at the time, as an adult, I did not remember that I could speak in tongues as a child. Because who knew? And a few years later, I would have my first experience speaking in tongues, and I will never forget that experience. It was actually more than a decade later. But I hid those things, understanding tongues, the way God would speak to me, and so much more, because in so many places, those things were not acceptable, like things that perhaps could have had people judging you or creating narratives about you. And in other places, because it was commonplace, like in her church, it was a place where so many people spoke in tongues. And they recognized that likely other people who didn't realize that they have that gifting would have the ability to do it because they create an environment for it. And I want you to think about that as we depart from this week's episode, because when you are standing in the fullness of your identity, you're creating other space for others to do the same. You're inviting them to be in the brilliance of how God created them, instead of allowing the way that this matrix world that we have been a part of have told us we have to suppress in order to get along. That survival was dependent upon us being like everyone else. Our real survival and living is dependent on us choosing to be who we were created to be. Period. Full stop. And I can tell you that no matter how much time is left in each of our individual lives, life is worth living when we can actually experience in the full. When we know we're delivering what it was that we came here to do. I am certain that Jonah did not want to spend the rest of his life in the belly of the whale. And oh, to have the experience on the other side of going to be who he was called to be for Nineveh, and to see the impact he could make there. What kind of change must that have created in him? That's what God is always offering us as we stand in the fullness of who we are, accepting our identity, and walking in alignment to our purpose. And if this episode touched you in a way that you are like, I really want to explore what purpose and identity look like for me, I invite you to take a look at the link in the comments for Crowned. Crowned is my divine guidance session where I work one-on-one with individuals who are interested in getting clear understanding about who God says they are and to deepen their relationship to what their divine purpose is. I work with clients to allow God to flow through me divinely, prophetically, to help deliver that information to you. And if you know you are being called to explore your divine identity and purpose more deeply in the same way that Kylie invited me to explore what God said to her, I am inviting you to explore what I am saying to you. If you do not embrace the fullness of your identity, you will not be able to fulfill all of what God has for you. And not only does that mean that we will have a gap in the place that you were uniquely designed to fulfill your purpose and how it impacts the rest of the world, but it also means that we don't get to live as fully as we ought. And that was never God's design. So if you're looking for support, take a look in the show notes at Crowned. You can explore the practice, set up a discovery call, and it would be my pleasure to support you along on your journey. And so next week, I invite you back as we continue our conversation about identity, as we continue to do this work. Isn't it amazing how, the name Healing is Required is like clearly pointing us back to doing this work to heal so that we can experience the fullness of life, that we can do what we came here to do? This work just keeps on evolving itself to bring us right back to the same point. Healing is absolutely required. And if you've not grabbed your book yet, I would encourage you to do so. You can grab it, available on Amazon. You can grab it on the website, which you can click the link in the show notes to take you right there to healingisrequired.com. And of course, we encourage you to share your healing story. So if you're already reading Healing is Required and you have some stories of impact, questions, or things like that, you're always welcome to reach out to us at connect@anikaapple.com. And who knows? Maybe your comment or your story, your testimonial will be shown in an upcoming episode. So thank you for joining me for this week, and I look forward to connecting with you again next week on the Anika Apple Podcast.